I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would even consider something like this. But I also never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would sit in her own living room, staring at her husband's phone lighting up at 2:13 a.m. with a name I didn't recognize. Lena Redhart. That heart wasn't there before. Or maybe it was, and I just never noticed. That's the thing about trust, it doesn't shatter all at once. It cracks quietly, almost politely, until one day you realize you've been standing on broken glass the whole time. My husband, Mark, had been off. Not in an obvious way. He still kissed me goodbye in the mornings. Still asked how my day was. Still remembered to take out the trash. But something had shifted. He smiled at his phone more than he smiled at me. He started taking calls outside. And the worst part? He stopped touching me the way he used to. Not completely. Just less. Like I had become familiar. Predictable. Optional. I tried to ignore it at first. Told myself I was overthinking. That work stress could explain everything. But then came Lena Redhart. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, something inside me hardened. If he was already halfway out of this marriage, why was I the only one still playing by the rules? That thought sat in my head longer than I'd like to admit. And once it was there, it didn't leave. A week later, I found myself sitting at a bar I'd never been to before. Not because I liked it, but because I knew Mark wouldn't be there. Dim lighting. Loud enough to drown thoughts. Quiet enough to make bad decisions feel intimate. I wasn't looking for anything specific. At least, that's what I told myself. Then he sat down next to me. Rough day, he asked, glancing at my untouched drink. I should have said no. I should have smiled politely and turned away. Instead, I said something like that. His name was Daniel. He wasn't overly charming. Not in a rehearsed way. But he listened. Actually listened. And when he looked at me, it didn't feel like I was invisible. We talked longer than I planned. Long enough for the guilt to start creeping in. Long enough for me to realize I didn't want to go home yet. When his hand brushed mine, it wasn't an accident. And I didn't pull away. That was the moment everything changed. Not when we left the bar together. Not when I got into his car. But right there, when I chose not to stop it. Because deep down, I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was deciding. And I told myself something I would regret later. If he's already cheating, then this doesn't count. I wish that were true. I didn't plan to go back to his place. That's what I told myself as we sat in his car, engine idling, the quiet heavier than anything we'd said inside the bar. Daniel didn't rush me. That made it worse. Because it meant the decision was entirely mine. Hey, he said softly, you don't have to do anything you're not sure about. I almost laughed at that. Because I was sure. Just not in the way a good person should be. So I nodded. And that was it. No dramatic moment. No sudden loss of control. Just a quiet, deliberate step across a line I knew exactly where to find. His apartment was simple. Clean, but lived in. There were books on the coffee table. A jacket thrown over the chair. No signs of anyone else. I noticed that immediately. I wish I could say it was because I cared about being the other woman. But the truth? I just didn't want competition. That realization should have stopped me. It didn't. We sat on the edge of his couch, still talking about nothing important. Work. Music. Random stories that didn't matter. But underneath it, there was tension. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just inevitable. When he kissed me, it wasn't rushed. It felt almost careful. Like he was giving me one last chance to walk away. I didn't take it. Instead, I leaned into it. And for a moment, just a moment, I forgot everything else. Forgot Mark. Forgot the message. Forgot the version of myself that would have been horrified by this a week ago. All that existed was the feeling of being wanted again. Of being seen. It wasn't wild or reckless like you'd imagine. It was quiet. Slow. And somehow that made it worse. Because there was no chaos to blame it on. No, I lost control excuse. Every second was a choice. Every touch, every breath, every step further, I allowed it. Afterward, I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the city outside. Reality doesn't crash down the way people say it does. It seeps in. Quietly. Unavoidably. Daniel didn't say much. He just lay beside me, giving me space. That should have been comforting. Instead, it made me feel exposed. Because now there was nothing left to distract me from what I'd done. I should go, I finally said. He nodded. No protest. No attempt to convince me to stay. And somehow, that stung more than if he had. The drive home felt longer than it actually was. I kept expecting to feel overwhelming guilt. But what I felt instead was something more complicated. Relief. And that scared me. Because it meant this hadn't just been about revenge. It had been something I wanted. When I walked into the house, Mark was sitting on the couch. Wide awake. Waiting. Hey, he said casually. You're home late. I froze for half a second, but it was enough. I saw it in his eyes. He noticed. Yeah, I said, forcing a shrug. Just needed some air. He studied me for a moment longer than usual. Then nodded. Okay, that was it. No questions. No accusations. Nothing. And somehow, that felt worse than anything else. Because for the first time, a thought crossed my mind that I hadn't considered before. What if he's not cheating at all? I barely slept that night. Not because of guilt. Not entirely, at least. It was the thought that kept looping in my head over and over, like something trying to break through. What if I was wrong? Mark had always been steady. Predictable in the best way. The kind of man who didn't forget anniversaries, who remembered how I take my coffee, who fixed things before I even noticed they were broken. Not the type you picture sneaking around. And yet, Lena Redhart. That didn't just appear out of nowhere. Right? The next morning felt normal. Too normal. Mark was already in the kitchen when I walked in, like always. Coffee brewing. Toast in the toaster. Morning news playing softly in the background. Morning, he said, glancing over his shoulder. Same tone. Same expression. Like nothing had changed. Like I hadn't crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Morning, I replied, trying to match his calm. I watched him for signs, anything out of place. Guilt. Tension. Distance. But there was nothing. If anything, he seemed more present than he had in weeks. Got any plans today? He asked, setting a mug in front of me. I hesitated. A normal answer would have been easy. But suddenly, everything felt like a test. Just errands, I said. He nodded. All right. Don't forget we're having dinner with my parents on Friday. Right. That? I'd completely forgotten. And somehow, that small detail hit harder than everything else. Because it meant he was still planning us. Still moving forward like we were fine. I couldn't take it anymore. I saw a message on your phone, I said suddenly. There it was. No easing into it. No strategy. Just the truth, dropped into the middle of an otherwise ordinary morning. Mark looked up. Not defensive. Not panicked. Just confused. Okay, he said. Lena, I added. With a heart. There was a pause. A short one. But long enough for my chest to tighten. Then. Oh. That was it. Just. Oh. And then, to my complete disbelief, he let out a quiet breath. Right. I should have told you. My stomach dropped. That wasn't denial. That wasn't confusion. That sounded like explanation. Which meant. So it is something, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Mark frowned slightly, like he was trying to figure out why I was upset. She's my cousin, he said. I blinked. What? Lena. From Germany? I haven't seen her in years. She's coming to visit next week. I just stared at him, waiting for the rest. Waiting for the catch. But there wasn't one. She puts a heart next to everyone's name, he added with a small shrug. Always has. It's kind of her thing. The room felt suddenly too quiet. Too still. Because everything I had built in my head, the suspicion, the justification, the reason, collapsed in seconds. You could have told me, I said weakly. Yeah, he admitted. That's on me. I didn't think it mattered. Didn't think it mattered. I almost laughed. Because it had mattered enough for me to destroy something real over something that wasn't. Why are you asking? He said after a moment. There it was. The question I wasn't ready to answer. I looked at him. At the man who had done nothing wrong. And for the first time since last night, the guilt hit properly. Sharp. Heavy. Unavoidable. Just curious, I said, forcing a smile. He studied me for a second. Long enough to make me wonder if he could see through me. Then he nodded. All right. But something had changed. Not in him. In me. Because now there was no justification left. No, he did it first. No excuse. Just the truth. I had made a choice. And I had made it alone. And the worst part? A small, quiet voice in my head whispered something I didn't want to admit. If I hadn't asked, I would have done it again. I should have stopped. That would have been the logical move. Cut contact, bury what happened, focus on my marriage, pretend it was a one-time lapse in judgment. Clean. Contained. Fixable. Instead, 2 days later, I found myself staring at my phone with Daniel's name on the screen. He hadn't texted much. Just once. Hey. No pressure, but I'd like to see you again. No guilt trip. No assumptions. Just an open door. I told myself I was only replying to close things properly. That's how it always starts, right? Yeah, maybe just to talk. Even as I sent it, I knew that was a lie. We met at the same bar. Same dim lighting. Same low music. But it felt different this time. He looked at me like he already knew the answer. You came back, he said, not surprised. I said I might, I replied, sitting down. A small smile. People don't usually come back, just to talk. I didn't answer that. Because there wasn't a version of the truth that made me look good. We kept things lighter at first. Safer topics. Less tension. But the silence between sentences felt heavier now, like both of us were aware of what had already happened and what could happen again. So, he said after a while, are you going to tell me what this actually is? There it was. No pretending. No vague intentions. Just clarity. I'm married, I said. He didn't flinch. I figured, he replied calmly. Then why? Because you came back, he cut in gently. That tells me more than a label does. I hated how accurate that was. I should have stood up right then. Walked out. Ended it. Instead, I stayed. And when his hand brushed mine again, I didn't move it away. This time felt different. Not because it was more intense, but because I couldn't pretend it was accidental anymore. There was no confusion. No emotional fog. Just a clear, undeniable choice. And somehow, that made it easier. Which scared me more than anything else. At one point, he leaned in slightly, his voice lower. You're thinking too much, he said. I'm not thinking enough, I replied. That earned a quiet laugh. Fair. When we left together, there was no hesitation. No pause in the car. No internal debate. Just a silent understanding. And that was the moment I realized something had shifted in a way I couldn't undo. Back at his place, everything felt familiar. Too familiar. Like I'd already started building a second version of my life and I hadn't even noticed. He didn't rush me. Didn't push. But he didn't hold back either. And this time, neither did I. There was a different kind of closeness now, not just physical, but something more dangerous. Comfort. Recognition. The sense that I could step into this version of myself and not feel questioned. Afterward, I didn't rush to leave. That was new. We sat there, talking quietly, the tension replaced with something softer. You're not what I expected, he said at one point. What did you expect? Someone who'd feel worse about this. I didn't answer. Because I didn't know what that said about me. When I finally got home, Mark was already asleep. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. The steady rhythm of his breathing. The familiarity. The life we'd built. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Not guilt. Not exactly. But distance. Like I was already halfway somewhere else. And the worst part? I wasn't sure I wanted to come back. Affairs don't fall apart in dramatic explosions. They unravel in details. Tiny ones. The kind you don't notice until they've already stacked into something impossible to hide. It started with my phone. I began keeping it face down. Then on silent. Then always within reach. Not because Mark had ever checked it. But because I knew that if he did, everything would collapse instantly. Daniel's messages weren't constant. That made them worse. They came at the wrong times, midday, late evening, once even early morning. Never anything explicit. Just enough to pull me back in. You disappeared. You okay? Saw something today that reminded me of you. Simple. Careful. Effective. And I answered every time. At home, things were strange. Mark hadn't changed. But I had. And that made everything feel off. He'd ask me how my day was, and I'd hesitate, filtering what I could say. He'd touch my shoulder, and I'd feel a flicker of something I couldn't name. Not rejection. Not discomfort. Just disconnection. Like I was playing a role I used to understand perfectly. Hey, he said one evening, sitting next to me on the couch. You've been kind of distant lately. There it was. Not an accusation. Just an observation. I'm just tired, I replied quickly. Too quickly. He nodded, but I saw it. That slight pause. That moment where he didn't fully believe me. That was the first crack. Not in him. In us. Friday came faster than I expected. Dinner with his parents. I almost canceled. Almost. But that would have been suspicious. So I went. Everything about it felt surreal. His mom hugging me at the door. His dad asking about my work. Mark sitting beside me, occasionally brushing his hand against mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. And I played along. Smiled. Answered questions. Laughed at the right moments. All while a part of me stayed somewhere else entirely. At one point, his mom said something that stuck with me. You two just fit, she smiled. It's rare to see a couple so stable. Stable. I nearly choked on my drink. Because if she knew. If any of them knew. That word would shatter instantly. Later that night, back home, Mark wrapped his arms around me from behind while I was in the kitchen. A simple gesture. Familiar. Comforting. Except this time I froze. Just for a second. But it was enough. You okay? He asked quietly. Yeah, I said, forcing myself to relax. Just tired. Again. Same excuse. He didn't push. But he didn't fully let it go either. I could feel it. That quiet awareness building. That night, lying in bed next to him, my phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. I knew who it was. I didn't need to check. I stared at the ceiling, pretending not to hear it. Waiting. Hoping it would stop. It didn't. Another buzz. Then another. Mark shifted slightly beside me. Not awake. But close enough. Carefully, slowly, I reached over and picked up the phone. One message. Then another. Then a third. You're quiet tonight. Everything okay? Or are you with him? My chest tightened. Because for the first time, it didn't feel like I was in control anymore. And then, a fourth message appeared. This one different. Short. Direct. I don't want to share you. I stared at the screen. And something clicked. This wasn't just a distraction anymore. This wasn't just about feeling wanted. This was turning into something else. Something heavier. Something that was going to demand a choice. And I had a feeling. No matter what I picked, I was going to lose. The message stayed on my screen longer than it should have. I don't want to share you. There it was. No more ambiguity. No more casual distance. Daniel had crossed a line, and somehow I knew it was because I had blurred it first. I didn't reply that night. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because every possible answer felt like a commitment. And I wasn't ready to admit that this had turned into something that required one. The next morning, everything felt heavier. Not chaotic. Not explosive. Just weighted. Like every normal interaction now carried something underneath it. Mark was already awake, scrolling through his phone when I opened my eyes. For a split second, panic hit. I imagined him seeing everything. The messages. The timing. The pattern. But then he just looked over and smiled slightly. Morning. Normal. Still normal. I nodded, but my attention stayed on his phone. Not because I thought he was cheating anymore, but because now I understood how easy it would be to hide something in plain sight. Hey, he said, locking his screen. I might be late today. Work's getting a bit crazy. Yeah, I replied. Yeah, new project. I told you about it. I froze for half a second. He had. I just hadn't been paying attention. Right, I said quickly. You did. He studied me again. That same look. Not suspicion, but awareness. And it was growing. After he left, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at my phone. Daniel hadn't texted again. That should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like pressure. Like silence that expected to be filled. So I did it. I typed first. What do you mean by that? I knew exactly what he meant. But I needed to hear him say it. His reply came almost instantly. I mean, this isn't casual for me. My stomach tightened. There it was. Defined. Real. Then what is it? I asked. A pause this time. Longer. Then. That depends on you. I set my phone down. Because suddenly, this wasn't about him anymore. It was about what I was willing to admit to myself. The truth? I liked being with him. Not just physically, but the way things felt when I was there. Uncomplicated. Unfiltered. Like I wasn't being measured against expectations I didn't even realize I had. But that wasn't a replacement for a marriage. Right? Later that day, I met him again. Not planned. Not officially. Just something that happened. Like it always seemed to. This time, the energy was different. Less curiosity. More tension. You saw my message, he said. Not a question. A statement. I did. And? I hesitated. That was all the answer he needed. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. I'm not doing this halfway, he said. I'm not going to be someone you see when it's convenient. That's not. It is, he cut in, not harshly, just firmly. And you know it. I didn't argue. Because I couldn't. So, what are you asking? I said quietly. I'm asking you to be honest, he replied. With me. And with yourself. Honest. That word again. Do you want this, he continued, or are you just afraid to let go of something else? I didn't answer right away. Because for the first time, I realized something uncomfortable. This wasn't just about choosing between two people. It was about choosing between two versions of my life. And neither of them came without consequences. When I got home that evening, Mark was already there. Lights on. Dinner made. Everything, exactly how it used to be. You're home early, I said. Yeah, he replied, watching me more closely than usual. Thought we could spend some time together. Something in his tone felt different. More intentional. Sit, he said gently. We should talk. My heart dropped. Because in that moment, I knew. I wasn't the only one who felt things shifting. And whatever he was about to say, there was no way this stayed hidden much longer. Sit, he said again, softer this time. I did. Not because I wanted to, but because there was no version of this where walking away didn't make everything worse. Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands loosely clasped. That alone was enough to tell me this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. I feel like I'm losing you, he said. No anger. No accusation. Just clarity. It caught me off guard. Because I had prepared for suspicion. For confrontation. For questions I'd have to dodge. But not this. I'm right here, I replied automatically. Even as I said it, it sounded empty. He noticed. Not really, he said quietly. You've been somewhere else for weeks. Weeks. That word hit harder than it should have. Because he wasn't wrong. I thought it was work, he continued. Or stress. But it's more than that, isn't it? I stayed silent. And in that silence, something shifted. He leaned back slightly, studying me in a way he hadn't before. Not like a partner trying to understand. Like someone preparing to accept an answer they might not like. Is there someone else? He asked. There it was. The moment. Simple. Direct. Impossible to dodge without making everything worse. My instinct was to deny it. To protect what was left. To keep things intact just a little longer. But something about the way he asked. Not desperate. Not aggressive. Just ready. Stopped me. I looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time in days, I saw him clearly. Not as the background of my life. Not as the safe option. But as a person who was about to be hurt and deserved better than half-truths. Yes, I said. The word felt heavier than anything I'd said in a long time. Mark didn't react immediately. No raised voice. No sudden movement. Just a slow exhale. Like a confirmation of something he had already started to suspect. Okay, he said quietly. That was it. No, who? No, how long? Just acceptance. And somehow that made it worse. I didn't mean for it to happen, I added quickly. It sounded weak the second it left my mouth. Because it wasn't true. Not anymore. Did you want it to? He asked. That question landed differently. More precise. More dangerous. I hesitated. And that hesitation said everything. Mark nodded slightly, almost to himself. Yeah, he said under his breath. The room felt smaller. Heavier. Like the air itself had shifted. I need you to be honest with me, he said, looking back up. Is this still happening? Another pause. Another choice. Yes. This time, his reaction changed. Not outwardly, but something behind his eyes closed. Subtly. Permanently. All right, he said, standing up slowly. No yelling. No dramatic exit. Just movement. Where are you going? I asked, my voice tighter than I expected. He grabbed his keys. Out, he replied. Mark. I just need space, he said, not looking at me. I don't want to say something I'll regret. That should have been a relief. It wasn't. Because as the door closed behind him, the silence that followed felt louder than anything he could have said. I sat there for a long time. Not moving. Not thinking clearly. Just existing in the aftermath of something I couldn't undo. My phone buzzed. I didn't need to check. I already knew. Still, I picked it up. A message from Daniel. Have you decided? I stared at the screen. Then at the empty room around me. And for the first time since this started, the reality of it all finally hit. There was no version of this where I didn't lose something real. The only question left was, how much was I willing to break before I stopped? Mark didn't come home that night. He texted once. I'm safe. Don't wait up. That was it. No anger. No follow-up. No questions. Just distance, clean and deliberate. I didn't sleep. I stayed on the couch, TV on but muted, phone in my hand like it might give me instructions if I stared at it long enough. Daniel's message was still there. Have you decided? I hadn't answered. Not because I didn't know what he meant, but because now the question felt different. Before, it was about desire. Now, it was about consequence. Morning came slowly. Too bright. Too quiet. Mark still wasn't home. His side of the bed untouched. That detail hit harder than anything else. Because it made the absence real. I made coffee out of habit. 2 cups. Then stood there, staring at the second one until I poured it down the sink. My phone buzzed again. Daniel. We should talk. I closed my eyes for a second. Then typed back. Okay. We met in the afternoon. Not at the bar this time. A quieter place. Neutral ground. Like both of us understood that whatever this was, it had crossed into something more serious. He didn't smile when he saw me. Didn't reach for me. Just studied my face. You told him, he said. Again, not a question. I nodded. How did he take it? He left. A pause. Then he leaned back slightly, exhaling. Okay. That word again. Everyone saying, okay, like it actually meant anything. So, he continued, what now? There it was. No room to hide. No distractions left. I looked at him. At the version of my life that had felt so clear just days ago. And, for the first time, I wasn't sure what I was looking at anymore. I don't know, I admitted. That wasn't the answer he wanted. I could see it immediately. His jaw tightened slightly. Not angry, but disappointed. I told you I'm not doing this halfway, he said. I know. Then don't. Simple. Direct. Uncompromising. I just need time, I said. To decide what? He asked. And that's when it hit me. Harder than anything else so far. I don't even know if I still have a decision to make, I said quietly. Because Mark leaving. That wasn't part of the plan. I thought I was managing 2 worlds. Balancing them. Keeping control. But I wasn't. I had already tipped everything over. Daniel watched me for a moment, then nodded slowly. Then figure it out, he said, standing up. But don't keep me in the middle while you do. And just like that, he stepped back. No dramatic goodbye. No ultimatum shouted across the table. Just a clear boundary. I sat there alone. Again. Two people. Two directions. And suddenly, neither one was waiting for me. When I got home, the house felt different. Not empty, but paused. Like something had ended, and the space hadn't caught up yet. There was a note on the table. Not long. Not emotional. Just a few lines. I'm staying with Alex for a bit. We'll talk when we're both ready. Please don't contact me right now. No, love you. No anger. Just distance. And that's when it finally settled in. Not the guilt. Not the regret. The reality. I hadn't just risked my marriage. I had already broken it. And now, for the first time since this all started, I was completely alone with the outcome. Silence changes shape after a few days. At first, it's loud, uncomfortable, heavy, impossible to ignore. Then it becomes normal. That was the part no one talks about. 3 days passed. No calls. No messages. Not from Mark. Not from Daniel. I checked my phone more times than I'd admit. Nothing. And the worst part? I had asked for this. Space. Time. Clarity. Turns out, when you finally get it, it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like being left behind. By the 4th day, I couldn't take it anymore. I texted Mark. Can we talk? No response. An hour later, I tried again. I know you said not to reach out, but we need to figure this out. Still nothing. That's when the panic started to creep in. Because up until now, I had assumed something without even realizing it. That he'd come back. That there would be a conversation. A process. A chance to fix things. But what if there wasn't? That night, I drove to Alex's place. I told myself it was just to talk. Just to see him. Just to understand where things stood. I knocked. Waited. Then the door opened. Mark stood there. For a split second, everything felt normal again. Familiar. Like I had just stepped into a different version of our life. Hey, I said, my voice quieter than I expected. He didn't step aside. Didn't invite me in. Just looked at me. Calm. Composed. Different. You shouldn't be here, he said. Not harsh. Just final. I just want to talk, I replied. We will, he said. But not like this. I swallowed. Mark, And that's when I saw her. She stepped into view behind him. Casual. Comfortable. Like she belonged there. It took my brain a second to process it. Because it didn't make sense. Until it did. Lena, he said, glancing back slightly. My stomach dropped. Lena. Not a cousin. Not a misunderstanding. A person. Standing in front of me. Real. Present. And looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I thought you said, I started. I lied, Mark said simply. No hesitation. No apology. Just truth. The world didn't spin. It didn't crash. It just shifted. How long? I asked, my voice barely holding together. A while, he replied. A while. So all of this, I gestured vaguely between us, the house, everything you knew. I suspected, he said. And then I confirmed. Confirmed. That word landed heavier than anything else. You checked my phone? I asked. He shook his head. No. A pause. Then, Daniel told me. Everything inside me went still. What? Mark held my gaze. Steady. Unmoving. He reached out, he said. A couple days ago. I couldn't breathe properly anymore. Why would he? Because he thought I deserved to know, Mark said. That didn't make sense. That didn't fit. But then I remembered. I don't want to share you. And suddenly, everything did. I looked past him again. At Lena. At the situation. At the version of reality I thought I understood. And realized I had been wrong about more than just one thing. I hadn't just lost control. I had never actually had it. I don't remember leaving Alex's place. One moment I was standing there, trying to process what Mark had just said. The next, I was in my car, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead like movement alone might make sense of it. Daniel told him. That was the part that kept replaying. Not Mark lying. Not Lena. Not even the fact that everything I thought I understood had been wrong. It was Daniel. The one person who had stood outside my marriage. The one who had no reason to protect it. And he was the one who ended it. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. That everything was already broken anyway. That the outcome would have been the same. But the truth? It mattered. Because it meant something I hadn't wanted to admit. I wasn't choosing anymore. Everything had already been decided for me. I drove home on autopilot. The house looked exactly the same. Nothing out of place. Nothing changed. Except everything had. Inside, it felt empty. Not in a dramatic way. Just quiet. Final. I sat on the couch, the same place Mark had been sitting when he told me he felt like he was losing me. Turns out, he already had. My phone buzzed. I almost didn't check it. Almost. Daniel. For a second, I considered ignoring it. Letting everything end cleanly. No more conversations. No more complications. But I opened it anyway. You talked to him. Not a question. I typed slowly. You told him. A pause. Then. Yeah. No apology. No explanation. Just confirmation. Why? I wrote. This time, the reply took longer. Long enough for me to feel it. That same quiet tension that had been there from the beginning. Then, because I meant what I said, I stared at the screen. Waiting. Another message appeared. I don't share. That should have made me angry. It should have felt manipulative. Controlling. Wrong. But instead, I understood something I hadn't before. Daniel hadn't been playing the same game I was. I thought I was balancing two lives. He was forcing one to end. And Mark? He had already started building a different one. I set my phone down. Didn't reply. Because for the first time since all of this started, there was nothing left to say. No version of this where I explained myself and things went back to normal. No version where I chose one path and didn't lose the other. Just consequences. Days passed. Then weeks. Mark filed for divorce. Clean. Efficient. No drama. We spoke once. Just once. I hope you figure out what you're looking for, he said. Not cruel. Not bitter. Just done. I didn't argue. Didn't ask him to stay. Because I knew. That version of us was already gone long before I admitted it. As for Daniel, we never saw each other again. Not because we couldn't. But because once everything else disappeared, so did whatever this had been. And that's the part no one tells you. Sometimes it's not about choosing the wrong person. It's about becoming someone who doesn't fit anywhere anymore. I thought I was reacting. Justifying. Leveling the playing field. But in the end, I wasn't responding to what I thought my husband had done. I was revealing something about myself I hadn't been ready to face. And once that's out, there's no putting it back. So yeah, I thought my husband was cheating. So I did first. And somehow, I was still the one who lost everything.